Yeah, now it is recording.
It was not recording. You know, these devices are very complex for me. So sorry.
Don't worry, teacher.
Sorry. So, what did I say? That in 1963, Anthony proposed three levels of organization in language teaching. The first was approach, the second method, and the third technique. What are approach? Assumptions and theories, and also beliefs. Beliefs are important in language teaching. What teachers believe, what students believe, what politicians believe about language teaching. Okay, so approach is axiomatic. When you say that something is axiomatic, it means that it's made up of theories. The method is a plan of organization of language. It's procedural. If approach is axiomatic, the method is procedural. And what are techniques? Are those actions that actually happen in the classroom. The activities that you do in the class, it's what really happens in the classroom. Implementational. Approach is axiomatic, the method is procedural, and the technique is axiomatic. However, this proposal didn't succeed. This proposal failed to give attention to the method itself, to include more things about the method, to explain more things about the method, to talk about the roles of teachers, students, materials, and those things. So a method is more specific than an approach, and even less specific. It's more specific than approach, but less specific than techniques. So as a reaction, perhaps as a reaction, well, I wouldn't say a reaction, but just with the idea to cooperate in this field of language teaching, Richards and Rogers proposed a new system of organization in 1986. Method, approach, design, and procedure. Method is the widest term. In the previous class, I used a metaphor. I told you that a method is like an umbrella that covers these concepts: approach, design, and procedure. What is the approach? The approach describes the theories about these two important concepts, language and learning. Language and learning. There is not an absolute agreement about language, nor about learning. So let's start with language. Richards and Rogers established that there are some theories about the nature of language, the nature of language. And they start pointing out that language is a complex phenomenon. Yes, definitely, language is a very complex phenomenon. And this phenomenon, I mean language, is studied from different areas of knowledge, from different disciplines. One of them is linguistics. So linguistics studies language, of course. Another discipline, psychology. Psychologists also have studied language. What happens with language? What are the implications of language? What are the effects of language in a child, in an adult, in an old person? Anthropologists also have studied this phenomenon of language, and sociology. So basically, these four disciplines have made a lot of efforts to understand the concept of language. Language. For example, the cognitive model, this is a theory. The cognitive model is a theory about language. And according to this model, language is absolutely in mind. Absolutely. Everything is in mind. Everything occurs in mind. Everything is constructed in mind. But there are other models. For example, the structural model. The structural model accepts that there is a very important system of relative elements in language. Related elements in language. Elements that are connected and that have to do with mind, but also with the elements of the world. So this is another theory. There is still another theory about language. First was cognitive model. Everything is in mind. Second, structural. It's a system of related elements, structures. And finally, lexical. Lexical is another model to try to explain this phenomenon of language. Lexical says that there are a lot of lexical chunks. Lexical chunks are pieces of language. Language are pieces of chunks, pieces of lexicals or lexical chunks. Everything is done, they say in language. That's why you say, I am, for example, in my case, talking about my age. I am 29, for example. And I don't say, I have 29 years. That's a lexical chunk that is already established by the language itself. So according to this theory, language is what? Lexical chunks, pieces of language that are already organized and established. You say, get rid of, take into account. Okay. Theories about nature of language. Very important. That's included in an approach. So, approach is made up of theories about two things, language and learning. Let's continue with this new system proposed by Richards and Rogers. Now we have theories about learning. How do people learn? That's another difficult phenomenon to explain. There's not just one theory about this. How do people learn things? How do people learn a language? How do people learn to ride a bicycle? How do people learn to cook? How do people learn to behave in a party? How do people have relationships with others? How do they learn those things? It's not that easy. Believe me, please believe me. Trust me, it is very complex to learning. So there are theories about learning. In the previous one, we saw theories about language. Now we have theories about learning. A lot of theories about learning. One is behaviorism. Behaviorism. For them, learning, how does a child learn? They say that people learn things just by habit. and how an action becomes a habit if you repeat it. So repetition, actions become a habit. If you repeat something, it is a habit. And there is a reinforcement, stimuli and answer. You say, hello, the other person says, hi. Reinforcement. So, how do people learn? According to the behaviorism, by habit. Learning is a habit. Learning is repetition. Learning is reinforcement. It sounds fine. So far. One example of behaviorism is one method which is called audiolingual. Audiolingual, the two concepts, method. According to this audiolingual method, you learn language by means of drills. Drills, more drills, and more drills. Drills are exercises. That's the point of view of behaviorism. It sounds fine so far, because there are more theories. For example, the cognitive theory. The cognitive theory. This theory states that learning is a cognitive process. It's a cognitive process. It's a process that occurs in our mind and that requires a mental effort. It is not just a habit or a repetition. No, it's a complex process that occurs in your mind and that requires mental effort. So, in language learning, it reflects this model: presentation, practice, and production, PPP. The cognitive theory stands that you learn by means of presentation of something, practice of something, and production. And that's the way it occurs or happens in language learning. That's the way that you should learn, or teachers should teach a language. Presentation first, practice, and finally production. The second theory. But there is another theory about learning. Remember that we are talking about learning. We are trying to figure out how people learn things. Figure out. We don't know exactly. Just figure out. A creative construction. That's another theory. Creative construction model. Language is not repetition, but a creative process, they say. Language is not just repetition, as behaviorism stated. No, it's a creative process. It's almost, I would say that it's almost the opposite. The opposite. Habit versus creativity. So you create things when you learn something. You create things. When you hear, for example, the word love, many ideas come through your mind. It's not just one idea. No, several ideas for different people. When you say justice, several different ideas come through your mind. And you create your own concepts about love, about justice, about education, about English, about learning. So you create things. Your mind creates a lot of things through a process. Another theory is the skill learning theory. They say that you learn, in language learning, you learn skills. Skills. So what is that? A set of behaviors through practice. Behaviors. Not repetition, but behaviors. The way you behave with others. So you listen, you speaking, you read, you write, you pronounce. And you learn them separately, in isolation. You learn them one by one. That's the skill learning. That's why we have productive skills and receptive skills. We have listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Some of them are productive, and some of these skills are receptive. How about skill? How about speak or speaking? Do you think it is productive or receptive?
I think it's both.
Both. Mm-hmm.
Because, well, if you don't receive any kind of stimulus, you don't know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see how to do it.
Doing that, okay.
Teacher, for me, both. For me, both. For the, excuse me, the empiric, yes, based of empiric form, maybe. For that
Okay.
reasons, is both.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Thank you, Juan David, and thank you, Gabriela. Thanks. Well, according to some authors, the four skills, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, are divided into two groups, receptive and productive. They say that speaking is productive. You produce something. And writing is also the productive skills because you produce pieces of language. So you speak, you produce. You write, you produce. You listen to the others and you receive information from others. So that's a receptive. And you read something. You read what wrote and someone else. So when you read, you receive information. So for some authors, listening and writing are productive. And listening and reading are receptive. However, as Gabriela pointed out, these are connected, these things. Listening is connected with speaking. If you don't listen to others, you would be talking in a monologue way, alone. So you need what? To produce and to receive information. So they are connected. Okay, good point. Interaction is another theory. This is another theory about what? About learning. Remember that we are talking about learning. How people learn. We are talking about the way people learn. So interaction is another one. Learners, an S is missing here. Learners work together. They work together according to this theory. You cannot learn, based on this theory, you cannot learn alone. You cannot learn in isolation. No, it's impossible. You learn by means of interaction with others. You interact with others. You speak to others. You listen to others. You write to others. You read what others write in WhatsApp, for example. So everything is connected. And you learn if you work together. You negotiate meaning. You negotiate meaning. When you talk to someone else, there's a negotiation in terms of meaning. And by means of this negotiation, you can come to an agreement. You agree things. For example, hey, why don't we prepare a party when this coronavirus ends? Why don't we prepare a party? Okay, the other says. Another person, oh, yes, that's a good idea. What can we do? Okay, we could prepare something to eat. We could invite Vicente. Oh, no, let's not invite him. No, that's not a good idea. So we negotiate meaning. Learning is negotiation, especially language learning. You negotiate meaning with others. The other theory is constructivism. That's another theory about learning. Constructivism. Language is not passive, but active. Learning is not passive. You are not like a bucket that receives information. You are not a recipient that receives information in a passive way, according to the constructivism. When you receive information, you are active because you construct something. Constructivism, so you construct. This theory holds that the learner constructs something internally in his mind. When for example, at this very moment, I'm trying to share with you information about theories about learning. So everybody, each one of you is trying to understand me in a different way. Not everybody understands things in the same way, exactly in the same way. That is impossible. We are not robots. We are human beings, and we are completely different. So we construct things in terms of meaning, in terms of language, in terms of new words in English, new structures. So we learn in different way. Another theory is sociocultural. For them, language is a dialogue between a learner and a knowledgeable other person. What is a knowledgeable other person? Is a person who knows more. Listen again. A knowledgeable person is a person who knows more of something than another person. So what is the sociocultural view about learning? Language is a dialogue between a learner, for example, about a child, a 3-month or a 6-month baby, and his mother, who knows more about language and about life. So that's a sociocultural theory. Language is a dialogue between a learner and the knowledgeable other person. Social setting, cultural organized. So this dialogue happens in a social setting. Social setting because you don't live alone. You live with someone else. You share time with your family, your friends, your boyfriend, your girlfriends, your teachers, the university. So that's a social setting. So language learning is a dialogue between a learner and a knowledgeable other person in a social setting, which is organized. This social setting is organized around culture. Culture in Pasto is different from culture in Tumaco. culture in Pasto is different from culture in Mocoa, and so on. So this sociocultural is based on this sociocultural theory, takes a lot of ideas coming from the constructivism and the interactional. Constructivism and the interactional. Another theory is about individual factors. Individual factors. Differences of this theory state that if you want to learn a language, you have to keep in mind the learner's attributes and the learner's personal situations or personal, I don't know, yes, attributes or qualities. So when learning something, motivation is important. If you're not motivated, if you are not highly motivated, you hardly learn. Shyness is very important in learning. Some of you might be shy people, so you don't like to speak in front of others. You don't like to talk to an audience. It doesn't mean that you don't know. No, the problem is that you are a shy person. You are a different person. If you're a shy person, you are a different person. That's not bad. That's not bad. Not at all. You're different. Anxiety. What is the role of anxiety when learning? Anxiety is very important, especially in language learning. In an oral test, you might feel anxiety and you might forget everything for that moment, but it does not mean that you don't know anything. And what are the learning strategies? This is important in this theory of individual factors. Not everybody learns in the same way. Some of you have some strategies. Some of you prefer, for example, to talk to others, or to read, or to listen to songs in English, or to study grammar, or to learn by heart, or videos, music, I don't know, different learning strategies. These are some theories about learning. The next concept is design. What is design? Design, according to Richards and Richards. Oh, sorry. According to Richards and Rogers, a design includes many things, several things, a lot of things. First, objectives. Objectives. It is not objectives. 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 Check. Objectives. What are they? They are outcomes to achieve. Something is missing here. A vowel. Achieve, sorry. The outcomes to achieve. Objectives are the goals. So you have a method, you have the approach, the theory, you have the design. What does it include? You are going to be a teacher, so you should know the method, the approach, the design. And what is the design? The objectives, the goals. What is the goal? Receptive skills, just reading and writing, or productive skills, speaking and writing. What is the objective? What is the main goal? To learn grammar, to learn pronunciation? Is the curso, student-oriented? When the course is student-oriented, student is the center of the class, is the most important person in the class. But if the course is teachers-oriented, so the most important person is the teacher. Objectives. Next, syllabus. Syllabus. The syllabus is the teaching program itself. When you are going to work in a high school or at university, before starting, you have to prepare a teaching program. What are you going and how are you going to organize your program? The teaching program. That's the program that we often present to you or show you at the beginning of each semester. So it has the content. What is the content of the program? And in which order am I going to teach these contents? Example, grammatical, lexical. That's the syllabus. It is the program, and it has the contents and the order. The order I'm going to teach those contents. The design also includes teaching activities. First, objectives. Second, syllabus. Third, teaching activities. That's included in the design. Example of teaching activity. What are teaching activities? Are those strategies that the teacher can make use of to teach something? For example, dialogues or information gap. Dialogues or information gap. Gap. Who knows the meaning of gap? What is gap? What? Gap is something.
Black hole.
Huh?
Similar to hole, space, maybe.
Yes, thank you. A gap is synonym to space, blank, something that is missing, What is information gap? This information gap is a good activity because in this activity, if there are two people, one of them doesn't know something, but the other person does, and vice versa. The other person doesn't know something that I do. That's information gap. And in real life, we use information gap at every single moment. When I talk to you in the street, for example, or at university, I hope to do it soon. I ask you some questions, you answer, you ask me some questions, and I answer, because there is always a gap. We don't know things. So that's why we talk to others and ask information. The other one is the information transfer. That's another activity, the information transfer. Transfer means change. So I could ask you to watch a video, and then write in a chart the most important ideas. That's a transfer of information. A transference of information, to change from one way to express something to another one. Or problem solving. How can we solve the problem for those students who do not have internet? These are teaching activities. When you are going to teach something as a teacher, You prepare dialogues, information gaps, information transfer, problem solving, exercises, drills, and a lot more. What is the learner's role? So the design also includes the learner's role. In your class, how will your students behave? Do you want them to be active, passive? Do you want them to process information? They perform dialogues, conversations, or role plays. The learner's role. Please, I don't like this. Passive students, I don't like. Okay. The teacher's role. That's also important in a design. It determines, does the teacher determine the content? Or the content is already organized in a textbook? Does the teacher influence learning? Does the teacher learn? Does the teacher want the students to learn in the same way he learned 30 or 40 years ago? Is the teacher a guide? Is a facilitator of things? Or it is the opposite? The teacher is there to complicate things. Is the teacher the primary source of language? Sometimes the teacher is the only source of language. Unfortunately, that's not a good idea. Nowadays, there are different sources of languages, images, music, songs, books, internet, videos. Is your teacher a counselor? Sorry. Does he help you in this process of learning? Okay. Finally, the role of materials. Is material primary in your class? Is material important in your class? Materials. Materials are those things or resources that we bring to class to help students understand the topic. Materials. For example, realia. What is realia? Real objects. Real objects. For example, a pencil, a book, laptop.
Yeah, it's about material.
Yeah, it's real material. Real material. It's realia. Realia is important. Sometimes it is impossible to use real objects. Of course, if you're teaching the word elephant, you cannot bring an elephant to your class. Of course not. But some things do. If you want to teach, for example, I don't know, objects that you usually take in your purse, use those real objects. Do not bring images. If you want to teach about clothing, and if you have a jacket, just show the jacket. Just show your shoes, a t-shirt, a belt, your socks, and those things. That's realia. What is the role of materials? It is also included in the design. Remember, we are talking about the design. We have textbooks. We have textbooks. Some of them are expensive, very expensive. Some of them are better than others. But we can use textbooks as materials in class, or software. Nowadays, there are a lot of software devices in the internet to help students learn language. Sorry. What is the role of materials? Do your materials allow students interaction? Interaction in class sometimes depends on the materials you bring to class. If you want your students to interact, you may choose accordingly materials for interaction or for interpretation or for repetition. Finally, remember, I'm sharing with you some ideas about Richards and Rogers' proposal about language teaching, method, approach, design, and procedure. This is the design. Design. You plan all these things before the class. Now the procedure. The procedure is the real, the actual. Remember, actual is not actual. What is actual? What is the meaning of actual? No? Actual is not actual. No. What is actual? In English, what is the meaning of actual? Actual means real. When you say actually, you mean really, realmente. So what is the procedure? The actual moment-to-moment technique is the moment-to-moment. Is what actually happens in each minute in class. That's the procedure. And it includes practice, integrate. Now, these practices are integrated in the method. Of course, they are part of the method. You choose.
Expected moment, perhaps.
Huh?
Expected moment, perhaps. Actual moment.
Yes. Well, but the actual moment is the real situation in class. Actual moment is the real situation, is what really happens in class. So practices, techniques are integrated in the method. And they are the realization of the method and the approach. Yes. You realize or carry out or put in practice the approach and the method by means of the procedure. Let me repeat this. You put in practice the approach and the method by means of procedure. And procedures have 3 dimensions. The first, there are activities to present new language. How are you going to teach for the first time a new piece of language? For example, comparatives. So you have to select in advance, previously, the activities that you are going to use to present for the first time this new language piece. For example, drills, dialogues, and activities. Activities to present language. Also activities for practicing languages. Well, once you present, you usually want or wish your students practice the language. So you have to select some activities to present and other activities to practice the language. They are different sometimes. And finally, activities to give feedback. Feedback. In language learning, feedback is important. You give feedback when you collect information. You gather information. Information about the student, information about the method, information about the time, information about the activities. What for? For improvement. The idea of the feedback is that you collect information, you gather information for improvement. So by means of feedback, you help your students to understand what they didn't. Okay. Give me a minute, please.
Teacher,
Yes.
could you also share that presentation with us? Maybe.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Now, I'm going to work on this introduction to language teaching. Introduction to language teaching. Language teaching has a big history. Big history. It's not new. Language teaching has been characterized by search of more effective ways of teaching. A lot of search related to language teaching. Search to try to find the best way to teach a language. There has been a debate. There has been a debate, a profound discussion 100 years ago, about the best way to teach language. And there is no a unique answer yet. So there has been a discussion about some issues. Aquí está mal escrito issues, claro. Ay. For example, for 100 years, for 100 years, there has been a discussion about grammar. What's the role of grammar in language teaching? Is grammar really important in language teachers? Some authors agree, some others disagree. Some others say, well, it's important, grammar and also practice. Grammar is necessary. Others say, no, grammar is not necessary. Because when you learn your first language, your mother doesn't teach you grammar. When you are learning a language as a child, you don't learn things like verb, adverb, relative clause. No, you don't learn those things. So some agree, some disagree. And there has been a big discussion about this. Another issue is accuracy versus fluency. Accuracy versus fluency. Accuracy. Is it important that the students' performance is accurate, no mistakes, no grammar mistakes, perfect English, accuracy, or fluency with mistakes? That's a discussion. That's an important discussion. What is important? Being accurate or being fluent? Or both? Or no one? There is a discussion about that. Another discussion is about the syllabus. What is the best syllabus to organize language teaching? What is the best language syllabus? Around grammar? Around rules? around dialogues. And also another issue which has been discussed about is about vocabulary. Vocabulary. What is the role of vocabulary in language teaching? Is it important to learn by heart 500 words or 200 expressions? Or you just need perhaps the most important 100 words? What is the role of vocabulary in language teaching? Sometimes you can't express yourself, or you can't express ideas to someone else because you don't know the exact words. So there has been a discussion about grammar, accuracy or fluency, the type of syllabus, the best type of syllabus, and also the role of vocabulary. More discussion about productive versus receptive skills. What are more important? Well, it depends. It depends. Some say, well, productive are better, receptive are better. Others, on the contrary, say, well, it depends on the interests and needs of the speakers. If you just want to write in English, you don't need to speak. Or if you need to speak, you don't need to write. For example, in the war, la guerra, you don't need to write, you just needed to produce things. Okay. More issues, learning and teaching theories. There has been a lot of discussion about this. What are the best learning theories? What are the best teaching theories? How does the learn better? How can a teacher teach better? How about memorization? This is another point of discussion. Do we have to memorize when language learning? Yes and no. Yes, I learned the conversations by heart, and it has worked to me. Others might say, no, it doesn't work. Memorization is not just important. You have to create sentences. You don't memorize everything that you are going to do. You have to improvise. Language is improvisation. Another issue is motivating learners. What is the role of motivation in learners? Perhaps you are a very good teacher. Perhaps your accent is perfect in English, or you speak like a native speaker. But you are not able, you are unable to motivate your students in class. Demotivated students hardly learn in class. They start doing other things if you are not highly motivated. Okay? So there has been a discussion about motivation. And also the next, effective learning strategies. What are the best strategies for the students to learn? What are the best learning strategies for your students? Or techniques for teaching the 4 skills? Remember, the 4 skills are listening, speaking, reading, and writing. How can I take advantage of some techniques for teaching these 4 skills? Finally, and there are more, but finally in this presentation, what is the role of materials and technology in language learning and in language teaching? Are materials more important than the teacher? Is technology more important than the teacher in your classroom? Can you combine materials, technology, and teacher, and also students? So there has been a wide discussion about this for 100 years. In the 20th century, all the 20th century, okay. Although much has been done, although, pay attention to what I'm trying to share with you. Although much has been done about these aspects and others, the teaching profession is continually exploring. It's continually exploring. Teachers continue exploring, keep on exploring new methods and options to address these issues and others. So the show continues. The show should continue. We are exploring every single day. Some theories last perhaps 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And then some others appear. Why? Because we are exploring new ideas. The field of teaching methods has been active since the 1900s. Methods, hablando de métodos. In the 1900s. 1901 is which century? A ver, una pregunta capciosa. If I say 1920, which century is that?
(1920)
Yes. Imagine that I say 1920. Which century is that?
Teacher, that would be the 20th century.
The what? Sorry?
20th century, teacher.
No.
Or the 19th? Is it the 18th, the 19th, or the 20th century? When I say 1920, 1920, what is that? 18th century, 19th century, or 20th century?
20th century.
Yes, definitely. It is 20th century. Ojo, que 1920 no es el siglo XIX. Cuidado con eso. El siglo XX. Okay. So, there have been a lot of methods, and some methods achieved acceptance or were well accepted all over the world and gained popularity. Some methods were well accepted and gained a high popularity among schools, among educational systems, among teachers, and among students. But since we keep on exploring, they were replaced. Those methods were replaced by newer or opposite or more appealing theories So as soon as methods appear, some others appear again. Consider newer or opposite, perhaps opposite, or more appealing theories. For example, GTM means grammar translation method. It was perhaps the first method in the world. And in reaction to this method, the direct method appears as a reaction. Okay. So we are talking about an introduction to language teaching. So the change of methods respond to demands, the change. This change appear because people and the world and the situations demand. For example, in the World War II, the army demanded what? The knowledge of all skills, all, not writing, not reading skills, just the oral skills, listening and speaking. So that's why the audiolingualism, the audiolingual method appears. Because in the world, what was the most important were the oral skills. That's a demand. Another demand, the demand made by immigrants with specific needs. Immigrants from India, immigrants from China, Italy, Spain, so different needs of immigrants. The internalization of education. Education became universal. So there was a need to create new language programs because education was not local anymore, but universal. The globalization. The world is connected nowadays. You can easily connect with someone else wherever. The spread of internet. That is another demand. Everybody knows internet. So, for example, it appeared the blended learning. Blended learning, it's a mix of classroom and computer technology. And the global spread, aquí tengo otro error, discúlpenme los errores, yo para esto sí. And the global spread of English. So we are talking about introduction to language teaching. Estoy contextualizándolos. The famous Latin. The famous Latin. Well, we live in a bilingual and multilingual world. Yes. Bilingual and multilingual world. In some countries, people are able to speak 4, 5 languages. In Europe, for example, people speak a lot of languages, at least 2, at least 2. Even the girl who sends tickets speaks 3 languages in Spain. I had that experience. So we live in a bilingual and multilingual world. Yes? And nowadays, perhaps the most studied language is English, or perhaps Mandarin. But 500 years ago, when Christopher Columbus came to America, Latin was the most studied language. Aquí es studied. ¿Cuántos errores que tengo? Qué pena con ustedes. Me duele cometer tantos errores. Most studied language. It was not English. Of course not. 500 years ago, it was Latin. The most important language all over the world. In the 16th century, however, in the 16th century, 16th century. Ya saben lo del siglo, ¿no? Siglo XVI comienza en 1501, no comienza en 1601. Cuidado con eso. In the 16th century, however, French, Italian, and English gain importance. In the 16th century, French, Italian, and English languages gained importance in Europe, and Latin was displaced. Mire esa palabra como la he escrito.
Teacher, sorry,
Excuse me?
could you repeat the year?
Okay. In the 16th century,
It means
de 1500 en adelante. 1501, 1502, hasta 1599 es el siglo XVI. Cuidado con eso. In the 16th century, so French, Italian, and French gained importance in Europe. And Latin was displaced of spoken and written communication. It was displaced by these languages, French, Italian, and English. But even that, Latin was very important. The study of classical Latin became a model of foreign languages study from the 17th to the 19th century. So Latin was the model. And French, Italian, and English were taught in the same way Latin was. Latin was very important. Even in England, for example, at that time, children had to take a course of Latin. Children in England studied Latin. Grammar contents, rules of the language, conjugation of verbs, and translation from one language to another and vice versa. So Latin had status. Modern language used the same procedures. And nowadays, think of this, nowadays, we also study rules, grammar, and sentences. That's the influence of Latin. At that time, speaking was not important. At that time, speaking of Latin, French, Italian, English were not important. Speaking was not the goal. Just reading aloud sentences. Students had translated. So you translate sentence. For example, yo trabajo en la universidad. Translate. I work at university. Solo eso es lo que se pronunciaba. But conversation was not important. So it was disconnected sentences what were taught to show rules. So you teach or they taught rules with disconnected sentences, disconnected, isolated sentences, and real sentences. German sentences, for example, German sentences were translated into French. Here is French. German sentences were translated into French and vice versa. This approach, these ideas became GTM. What is GTM? Grammar Translation Method. Perhaps the first method. Perhaps the first method. Do you find this history interesting or boring? How do you find this history of language teaching? Interesting, boring?
For me, interesting, teacher, because the World War II is an important thing of humanity,
Mhm.
and is that the topic have that information about a little, excuse me, a little information about that.
Yeah.
What the forms, the
Uh-huh.
importances of language. Mhm.
Thank you, Juan David. Well, remember that in the previous class, we watched a video of the first method, grammar translation method. Remember?
Yes, of course.
Yes, and I ask you 3 questions.
Yeah.
According 3 or 4 questions according to that video. In that video, what is the student's role? Active or passive? What did you see? What did you understand from that video? What's the role of the student? Is it active or passive?
Active.
Sure. Did students interact?
Yeah. Because are you listening to me?
Yes, 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 Mateo.
Yes. Yeah, because they are asking questions about English words which they did not understand.
Mhm.
And second, perhaps give good grammar examples in in their target language, which is English, and they associate examples from Malay to English. So for that reason, they were active.
Mhm. Well, perhaps they asked some questions.
Teacher, excuse me,
Ah,
I don't
yeah.
know. Maybe it's passive because the students are expected to memorize.
Speaking.
For me, maybe that is passive because the students are expected to memorize a list of grammar or grammar rules and vocabulary. I don't know.
Mhm. Okay. 2 points of view, active and passive. What is the teacher's role according to the grammar translation method? What's the teacher's role? Any idea?
Teacher, excuse me, teacher, teacher have the rule of a guide for the students.
Mhm. Who's the authority in the class?
The teacher.
Professor, yeah.
Teachers.
Any other comment? Yes, the teacher, the professor. Yes.
Uh,
What are the
yeah,
activities? Ah, yes. Tell me.
I wanted to say also that have the role to teach, and the students need to learn, and it's a big responsibility from teachers.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with you. It's a big responsibility because they are learning and the teacher is teaching grammar rules, exact grammar rules, and exact words with exact meaning, with exact translation. And what is the goal, in your opinion? What is the goal of this grammar translation method? What is the goal? What's the main objective?
Perhaps enlarge new English vocabulary.
That's a good point. Thank you. Another idea. To learn English vocabulary, yes, another idea.
The goal of this activity is with the comparison between the two languages helps students to have a better understanding of the meaning of abstract words and complicated sentences.
Yes, perhaps they compare the two languages.
Yeah, they contrast.
They
Okay.
contrast the two languages. Good point. Yes.
Also to get a new vocabulary.
Yeah.
Yes, they had to learn a new vocabulary, new words, new vocab. Perfect. I agree with you. Okay. Now look at this. Okay, that was a presentation of grammar translation method. In this video, you saw some important principles, ideas, and activities about perhaps the first method in language teaching, the grammar translation method. Here we go again. Okay? It was used for foreign or second language, both foreign or second language. We already know the difference between these two terms. How? By teaching detailed grammar rules. Grammar rules. Example in English. What are the rules for the third singular person? S, yes. What are the rules for the simple past? Ed. What are the rules for ing forms? That was very important in grammar translation method. Followed by the application of knowledge in tasks such as translation of L2 to the target language. So once you have learned the rules, you have to applicate these rules where? In a text. How? Translating the text from language 2 to the target language. First, language 1 to the target language. Example. Yo quiero café. Tradúzcalo al inglés. I want coffee. Okay. Important things. Learning rules and applying them. Let's continue. Five concepts of grammar translation method. 1. Learning grammar rules. Translated back into back and forth. Back and forth is an expression, a phrasal verb. It's a collocation. Back and forth. Who knows the meaning of back and forth? Back and forth means de ida y de vuelta, de allá para acá. Translating back and forth between L2 and L1 and L2. Example. Yo quiero café. ¿Cómo se dice eso en inglés? I want coffee. O lo contrario. I want coffee. ¿Cómo se dice eso en inglés? Yo quiero café. Okay. Next, memorizing a list of words. 5 concepts. Learning rules, translation, memorizing words. 3. Utilizing exercises in test in constrained way. Constrained means limited. Using exercises in tests. And explicit error correction. So error was very important in this method. You mustn't make mistakes or errors. Next. Very old. It's the most traditional of all methods widely used in the early 20s and 30s. It derived from the classical method of teaching Latin and Greek, especially Latin. What are the goals? To learn grammar. To learn grammar, rules and vocabulary of the TL. TL means target language. What is the target language? The language that is being studied. For example, in our case, the target language is English. That's the target language because that's the language we are learning. Another goal is to develop reading skills to a level where they can read literature in the target language. Literature was very important for the grammar translation method. To read, understand, and translate literature, books, history books, culture books, literature, and to develop students' mental discipline. Yes, because you have to translate, but based on specific grammar rules and vocabulary. Next. Okay. How did they teach vocabulary? How can we teach vocabulary based on the grammar translation method? Vocabulary is often taught in isolated words, separated words, in list of words. Learn this list of words rather than phrases or full sentences. You learn words in isolation. Lesson is delivered in the native language. All lessons were conducted in the native language. In our case, that is Spanish. So the classes were in Spanish, the native language. It was a teacher center with a little use of the target language. The teacher was the most important person in the lesson. Little use of the target language. English was not used, for example, in our case. So pronunciation of words are given little attention. Pronunciation was not really important because what this method looked for was translating and reading literature. So pronunciation was not important in grammar translation method. Students are taught to construct sentences using correct grammar. Students are taught to construct sentences using correct grammar. No mistakes are allowed. Remember that in everyday conversations, everybody makes mistakes, even in English, Spanish, French, Italian, whatever. Translating passages is one of the most common activities in regards of grammar translation. So translating. Okay, translation. Activities in grammar translation method. 1. Translating a passage from language 1 to language 2 and vice versa. Memorization of vocabulary list of words. Constructing sentences using verbs and nouns. More activities. Reading comprehension questions. We use them nowadays. Read the text and answer the questions. Reading comprehension questions. Fill in the blanks. Some of them are used nowadays. Complete this conversation. Deductive application of rule. So you first explain the rule and then you applied the rule on examples. Método deductivo. And antonyms and synonyms. Strengths Strengths means good points of grammar translation method. First, language one shapes thinking, and translations help better understanding. Shapes thinking. You have to find the appropriate words to translate. So you have to think in the exact words to translate. Improves writing skills, yes, because you know the grammar, you know rules. Invites speculation and discussion. Discussion. What could be the meaning of that word? What could be the meaning of that word? Next. Encourage students to guess meaning of vocabulary, to guess, to discover. Enhance, increase writing and reading skills. Increase, enhance writing and reading skills. Still to come. But there are constraints to it. Constraints are limitations. Limitations. Less time is spent on oral practice. No oral communication in class. Attention is centered on the teachers instead of students. Students may have difficulties relating to the language context. Context is complex. Indian context is not the same as Spanish or Colombian context to understand a language. Using solely grammar translation method may be boring for students due to little communication between them. There is no communication. Look at this graphic. Passive learning. Students do not participate so much in class, just for asking questions about words or vocabulary. Target students. Target students. This method is good for students who seek to enjoy literacy texts in the target language. This method is good for students lacking in grammar proficiency and vocabulary, students who have problems with grammar or proficient vocabulary. ¿Para quién más es bueno este método? Aquí va. Okay, so now, no more. So how can you evaluate? Written tests are conducted and students are given a passage to translate. Questions about foreign culture are given for students to apply the grammar learned. Questions about the culture. Okay, friends of mine. That's what I wanted to share about grammar translation method. What do you think about the class? How was the lesson?
Good teacher. Thank you so much for that.
Do you have more ideas about the grammar translation method? Brian, do you have ideas? Now, after this lesson, do you have more ideas about the grammar translation method, Brian? Ana Maria, are you there? Ana Maria. Camila, are you there?
Yes,
Camila?
teacher.
Ana Maria? Ana Maria.
Yes.
Do you have more ideas about the grammar translation method after this class?
So I love the idea of try to throw songs. O sea, ¿cómo podría decirlo, profe? O sea, me gustó, no tendría más ideas, sino que, o sea, me gustó bastante esto de poder implementar esta nueva forma de enseñar un idioma a través de las canciones. Pues me parece una idea excelente y más que todo en los niños. Para ponerlo en práctica con los niños, pues me gusta bastante.
But Ana Maria, and for everybody, do you think it's a good idea to use the grammar translation method and to be translating into Spanish every single thing that is expressed in class, in lesson? It's a good idea to be translating into Spanish.
Teacher.
Yes.
Diana.
Diana.
I don't think like we have to use every single thing, every single word. Like I don't think we have to translate every single word in English or in Spanish, because they can assume some meanings and they can know, like if we can teach them, for example, that a chair, it's like the word we show the imagine and we say like this is a chair. We are not translating. We are showing him the real word in the language. So I don't think it's necessary to translate everything, because they can learn more things by assuming things.
Oh, yes, I agree with you. So remember, this method was used more than 100 years ago. But there are some activities that are still used in nowadays classes. Any other comment?
Me, Gabi.
Gabi.
I think that when we translate something into another language, we are making that thing to losing it properly meaning. I think it's to translate something into another language, it's half and half, because we can understand better, but we are making that thing to losing that meaning, that properly meaning.
The proper meaning. Gabriela, I agree with you. When you translate into another language, perhaps you deviate or you change the meaning of the real. You change the real meaning when you translate into another language. Perhaps we never will know what Shakespeare exactly wanted to say in his books. We were never, and we are not, and we will not in his mind. So we don't know what was the exact meaning he wanted to translate, to transmit. So it is not a good idea to translate everything in class. Wow, something happened here, I'm sorry. Okay, well, Anyway, this is the beginning of the methods that we are going to study. Still to come, we will see a lot of methods for you to have a clear idea or a better idea or a wider idea about methods. We are going to start to finish right now. Thank you for your attendance. See you next class. If you don't have any comment, I would like to say...
Is there any class on Friday? Because it's free day.
Friday, and what happens?
Friday is May 1st. So
it's a holiday?
Yes.
Let me check if it is a holiday.
Happy Workers' Day.
Let me check.
Yeah. 1st May.
1st May. Oh, yes. It's a holiday. No, so we are not going to have classes then. Anyway, I want you to be attentive, motivated with this class. I know that this might be a boring class because we have to study theories, theoretical things, and sometimes that is very boring. I try to avoid being boring in this type of classes, in these lessons, but the topic is arid. Yes, I cannot be very interactive in this class. I have to share with you some theory, more theory and more theory about methods. So I regret for my lessons because they are very theoretical and they are going to be theoretical. Okay, you understand?
Yes, teacher.
Okay.
But it's not a mistake. It's
okay.
According to the circumstances.
Oh, yes, yes. Okay, so thank you for attending my class. We were 24 today.
Profe, no se olvide de enviarnos la clase grabada y las diapositivas. Es un favor que le pide Melissa específicamente.
No, y profe, disculpe, igual también creo que sería muy conveniente para todos de que pueda compartirnos eso con los representantes de los grupos, las diapositivas, para así nosotros tener una base de repaso que es buena, puesto que sus presentaciones han sido claras y concisas.
Pero yo puedo, si yo envío el video, allí deben estar las diapositivas también, ¿o no?
Sí aparecen las diapositivas, pero ahorita Melissa me estaba comentando que a ella le queda muy costoso mirar la clase completa o a veces el internet de ella porque está en el campo en una vereda.
Claro,
no
latencia.
Le carga bien y no puede mirar la clase completa, entonces que porfa pues nos envíe las diapositivas.
Gaby, la pregunta que les estoy haciendo es a todos para que me ayuden. Si yo envío el video, ahí también van las diapositivas que he presentado, ¿o no? Esas son
Sí, claro, claro que sí, profe. O sea, toda su presentación quedó grabada.
Claro, ahí van las diapositivas también.
Sí, profe, pero es que, por ejemplo, como le digo a Melissa específicamente, pues porque ella es la que me pide que le diga, ella no puede mirar todo el video completo porque el internet de ella está de mal en peor. Entonces...
Claro, o sea, le entiendo a Gabriela, disculpe, profe, y disculpa, Gabriela, entiendo esa parte, puesto que para poderlo descargar o mirarlo online, como se diría, pues la latencia de la compañera, eso es a lo que se refiere Gabriela, de que la latencia de la compañera no es estable.
Bueno.
Gabriela,
¿listo?
Yo le tomé pantallazos a las diapositivas, yo se las envío a Melissa.
Vale, Jorge, muchas gracias.
Bueno, Jorge.
No problem.
Vale, el problema es que a mí todo me cuesta en esta tecnología, no puedo.
Claro.
Bueno. Okay. So thank you for your
Thank you, teacher.
attendance and see you next class. Okay?
Teacher, goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye.
See you Monday
Thank you.
on,
Okay.
no, Wednesday, the next